Hi everyone, my name is Jeannie Culbertson, and in this video I'm going to explain the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle is the sequence of events that happens every time the heart beats. Instead of thinking of it as just phases to memorize, it's easier to understand it as a continuous loop driven by pressure changes and electrical signals. Blood always moves from areas of higher pressure to lower pressure, and that's what controls valve movement and blood flow throughout the heart. I'm going to walk through one full cycle step by step using this diagram. Right now, the heart is in a relaxed state called diastole. During this phase, blood is returning to the heart from the body and the lungs, and it's entering the atria. Because the pressure in the atria is higher than in the ventricles, the AV valves are open and blood flows passively into the ventricles. The semilunar valves are closed at this point because the pressure in the arteries is still higher than the ventricles. Next, the atria contract. This is triggered by the P wave on the ECG, which represents atrial depolarization. When the atria contract, they push the remaining blood into the ventricles. This is sometimes called the atrial kick, and it helps maximize how much blood fills the ventricles before they contract. Now we move into ventricular systole. The ventricles depolarize, which corresponds to the QRS complex on the ECG. This causes the ventricles to contract, and as they contract, pressure inside the ventricles rises quickly. Once the ventricular pressure becomes higher than the pressure in the atria, the AV valves close. This is important because it prevents blood from flowing backward into the atria. As the ventricles continue to contract, pressure keeps increasing. Eventually, the pressure inside the ventricles becomes higher than the pressure in the aorta and pulmonary trunk. At that point, the semilunar valves open, and the blood is ejected out of the heart. This is the ejection phase, and it's what actually delivers blood to the body and the lungs. After that, the ventricles begin to relax. This is associated with the T wave on the ECG, which represents ventricular repolarization. As the ventricles relax, the pressure inside them drops, and when the pressure in the ventricles becomes lower than the pressure in the arteries, the semilunar valves close. This prevents blood from flowing backward into the ventricles. Finally, as the ventricles continue to relax, their pressure drops below the pressure in the atria again. This causes the AV valves to open, and the ventricles begin to fill with blood once more. At this point, the cycle repeats. The most important idea to understand is that pressure is what drives everything. When pressure increases in one area, it forces valves to close or open, depending on the pressure gradient. This determines the direction of blood flow at every step. Without these pressure differences, blood would not move efficiently throughout the heart. This cycle is also closely tied to electrical activity. The P wave causes atrial contraction. The QRS complex causes ventricular contraction, and the T wave is associated with ventricular relaxation. These electrical signals ensure that the chambers contract in the correct order so blood flows efficiently. If something in this cycle is disrupted, it affects the entire system. For example, if the ventricles can't generate enough pressure, the semilunar valves may not open properly, which reduces cardiac output. If the AV valves don't close correctly, blood can flow backward into the atria, which decreases efficiency and leads to conditions like valve regurgitation. Even small changes in pressure or timing can have significant effects on overall circulation. So instead of memorizing separate steps, the cardiac cycle should be understood as a coordinated system where electrical activity creates pressure changes control valve movement, and valve movement determines blood flow. When you think about it this way, it becomes much easier to predict what could happen if something changes. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for listening.